for Pacifica Radio, March 2nd, 2023. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Antiwar Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm the editorial director of Antiwar.com, and I'm the editor of the book, Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. You can find my full interview archive, more than 5,800 of them now, going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And you can follow me on Twitter, if you dare, at Scott Horton Show. All right. Introducing our news editor at Antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp. And he also is the host of Antiwar News, a great podcast on YouTube and also on all your great podcast catchers, where he covers the top news for you every day, as he does in writing at news.antiwar.com. Welcome back to the show, Dave. How are you?
Good, Scott. Thanks for having me back.
Very happy to have you here. Big breaking news. Hit me.
Yeah, so it looks like Secretary of State Antony Blinken just met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. And now this comes, over a year after the Russian invasion. And this is their first known, public face-to-face meeting. This story just broke right before we talk. I saw a write-up by Matt Lee in the Associated Press. They met in New Delhi, India, on the sidelines of the G20 summit. And according to Matt Lee, there was no indication of any movement toward easing tensions, no sign that, the talks are going to lead to any sort of detente or anything like that, unfortunately. And they chatted for roughly 10 minutes. So pretty short meeting, but still significant news just because of, how little they've talked. They've only held one known phone call since the invasion over a year ago. And that was over a prisoner swap. They didn't even discuss, the war in Ukraine, according to Blinken's account of it. It just shows, how bad at his job he is, because he is supposed to be America's top diplomat.
Yeah, he is a monster. All right, so I have Matt Lee's story here. For people who want to check this out, it's U.S.-Russia hold highest level talks since Ukraine invasion, and this is huge. And is there any substance to the story, as far as you know?
All I've seen so far is Blinken's account of it, and he told Lavrov, end the war. That's what has to happen. Russia has to withdraw, that typical talking point. And he also urged Russia to reverse its decision to suspend New START, which is the last nuclear treaty between the two powers that Putin just suspended Russia's participation in. And he told Moscow to release Paul Whelan, who is I believe he's a former U.S. Marine who's been locked up in Russia for a few years now. So kind of the typical talking points. But again, this is just Blinken's public account. Who knows really what went down in this meeting? Maybe we'll see some more about it, get some leaks. But yeah, I think it's a good sign that they're talking, at least at this point. And there are a lot of signs that the Biden administration is thinking about winding this war down, although they're really pushing Ukraine to go on the offensive over these next few months, which risks a pretty huge escalation, of course.
Antiwar Radio, Scott Horton here, talking with Dave DeCamp from Antiwar.com. And so talk more about that, the indications that the Biden administration is trying to figure out how to shift gears here.
So when William Burns, the director of the CIA, went to Kiev in January and met with Zelensky, he told Zelensky that, this is a pivotal moment in the war, because we don't think we're going to be able to keep getting as much aid as we can. They don't think they're going to get it through Congress, is what they're telling Ukraine. Now, on the other hand, we've seen some dissent from Republicans, but still overall, most Republicans, I think, would vote for Ukrainian aid. And of course, there's no opposition from the Democrats. So it seems like it's something they're telling Ukraine that I don't know if is really true. And I've actually seen Ukrainian officials say that they think the administration might be using Congress as an excuse to wind down the aid. Now, if they keep spending the current aid package, if you remember in December, Congress passed $45 billion for Ukraine. That brought the total of U.S. spending on the war to $113 billion. So they're still using that $45 billion when you see them announce new weapons packages, new economic aid. And if they keep spending it at this rate, it looks like it's going to dry up by the summer. And I saw Mike Rogers, who's the head of the House, I believe, Armed Services Committee in Congress, say that he wants them to push Ukraine towards negotiations with Russia by the summer. But again, he's also calling for Biden to send fighter jets and longer range missiles so they can attack Crimea. So again, these next few months are when the big risk of escalation is. And also, while they're thinking about winding it down, NATO has big ideas for Ukraine. They don't, there's no sign they're going to try to make them a full member, but they want to sign deals with Ukraine that, they're going to be able to access basically whatever Western military equipment they want in the future, including fighter jets. They want to start building weapons in Ukraine, manufacturing weapons there to really just, solidify this NATO outpost on Russia's border. So from the Russian side, I don't think there's any sign that they are looking for talks right now. I think they have their goals in mind, which aren't exactly clear. I would guess they're going to focus on taking the rest of the Donbass, but they don't seem interested in talks right now. I think they've given up on that. So while the Biden administration is thinking about, an end to this thing because they want to focus on China, I don't think Russia is right now.
Man, what a mess. All right, so tell us a little bit more about this threat of a Ukrainian attack on Crimea. Do you really expect that to come soon?
Well, Zelensky said that they are preparing for it. But if you look at the map, Russia still controls a good amount of territory to the north of Crimea, which isn't really under threat of any kind of Ukrainian push right now. So a real, full-blown Ukrainian attempt to take Crimea, that's not going to happen anytime soon. The question is if they're going to start launching more attacks on Crimea. And the U.S., Victoria Nuland recently said that they support Ukrainian attacks on the peninsula. And we've seen more sabotage and drone attacks inside Russia, mainland Russia, not Crimea. Just today, Russia's saying that some Ukrainian saboteurs, opened fire on some vehicles in Bryansk, which borders Ukraine. So we're seeing an increase in that, which I think risks an escalation. Just the other day, Putin told the FSB, which is Russia's domestic intelligence agency, that Western intelligence agencies, are involved in these operations inside Russia. That's the first time I've seen him say that. He might have said that earlier in the war and I missed it, but it reminded me of that report from Jack Murphy, which we've discussed from back in December. He said that the CIA is using a NATO country's intelligence services to back sabotage attacks inside Russia. And here you have Putin saying something similar. So all this stuff, again, the attacks on Crimea and these operations inside Russia risk a huge escalation. And you have Medvedev, always threatening that Russia is willing to defend itself with nukes. He's the former Russian president, but he's still in the government. He's on the Security Council. So dangerous stuff, which is kind of being downplayed now by Biden, which is strange. The U.S. is kind of downplaying the risk more so now than they were a few months ago.
All right. So tell us about the Chinese peace proposal.
Yeah. So the China put out this 12-point plan, which was kind of just a general outline for a way to bring an end to the war. They didn't say anything specific like hold referendums here or they get this territory. The main gist of it was stop fighting and enter peace talks. And that's what China's been, calling for this whole time. And what I thought was interesting, Russia kind of dismissed it, but, they're always talking to China. They said they're happy to talk about it. Zelensky expressed kind of an openness to it. I think he's trying to keep some sort of relations with China. He said he wants the president Xi Jinping to visit Ukraine. But then he had Biden just completely dismiss it, say that China shouldn't even be involved in negotiations, showing how the U.S. has been discouraging real peace talks this whole time. And this comes as the U.S. is accusing China of considering arming Russia, but I haven't seen any signs it's going to happen. China has been saying that sending weapons into the conflict is counterproductive and would prolong the war. So I'd be surprised if they say that publicly and then turn around and start arming Russia.
Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen, all of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free. Just sign up for the email list at the bottom of the page at scotthorton.org or go to scotthorton.org/subscribe. Get All the War Lies by me for free. And then you'll never have to believe them again. Hey, y'all, Scott here. Let me tell you about Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Who knew? Artificial bank credit expansion leads to price inflation and terribly distorted markets. If you've got any savings left at all, you need to protect them. You need to put some, at least, into precious metals. Well, Roberts & Roberts can set you up with the best deals on silver, gold, platinum, and palladium, and they've been doing this since 1977. Hey, if you just need some sound advice about sound money, they're there for you, too. Call Tim Fry and the guys at 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. Or check them out at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. You'll be glad you did. Yeah, they did that almost a year ago. They accused the Chinese of that, and then later they backed down and said, well, we were just kind of bluffing about that.
There was a report in NBC News that said it was based on no solid evidence or something, that claim.
One more thing on Ukraine before we switch real quick. I hope we have time. But there was this report in ABC News about this American Marine who's been fighting with the Foreign Legion there in the Donbass and what he had to say about the war.
Yeah. And this American Marine, he said that the estimated, life expectancy of a Ukrainian soldier fighting on the front line around Bakhmut is 4 hours. And I mean, it's just an anecdote from somebody that says that they've been there, but I think it really shows how brutal that fight is. It's a huge artillery battle. And, he called it the meat grinder. And we've been hearing a lot of accounts like that. I thought it was interesting to hear, an American former Marine say that. And the Ukrainians are still holding on to Bakhmut, which is a small city in Donetsk, pre-war population of about 70,000. The current battle started in August 2022. So it's been going on for a long time. And the U.S. and Germany and other NATO countries have said that they think Ukraine is, spending too many resources on this city. And Russian forces, they just started making gains around the city in January, and they're starting to slowly encircle it. So there's signs that they might pull out. Ukrainian officials are saying that they might pull out and that they don't want to, lose too many people. But it seems like they're losing a lot. And, they keep a really tight lid on the casualty numbers. So I thought that kind of anecdote gives us a peek into how brutal this battle is, how much artillery they're using.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now in the Middle East, I told you so. Looks like we're switching sides in the Yemen War again, huh?
Yeah, so there's been so far 2 reported suspected U.S. drone strikes. I haven't seen U.S. Central Command officially take credit for them. And sources, on the ground or from the Saudi-backed government have said that they targeted al-Qaeda. And this comes as the Saudis and the Houthis do seem like they're close to a deal, which would be great. They just let a container ship carrying general cargo goods into Hodeidah, which is Yemen's Red Sea port, for the first time since 2016. That just shows how they've been enforcing this blockade, even though the U.S. has lied and said the country's not under blockade. I think that really demonstrates it. And that was done to facilitate these peace talks that are going on. So as we see that, we see 2 U.S. airstrikes against al-Qaeda in Marib, probably in the Saudi-backed government's controlled territory, because we know that they have used al-Qaeda in their fight against the Houthis. There's been a lot of reporting on this, that they have hired al-Qaeda fighters to fight the Houthis, and weapons being sold to the Saudis and the UAE are ending up in al-Qaeda's hands, AQAP's hands. So yeah, it looks like as that war is winding down, there's a chance. There have been occasional U.S. airstrikes against AQAP this whole time. And actually, the year that the U.S. bombed Yemen the most, this is U.S. airplanes and drones we're talking about, was in 2017, was Trump's first year in office. The U.S. military reported 131 airstrikes, and they said they were targeting AQAP, while at the same time really supporting the Saudi coalition against the Houthis. Since that year, it really winded down. In 2022, last year, the military claimed no airstrikes, but Air Wars, which is that great monitoring group, they recorded 2 suspected U.S. airstrikes. So 2 last year, 2 this year, and it's still pretty early on, so we could be looking at an escalation of that.
Yeah. Well, most of al-Qaeda just joined the UAE's militia, so once that part of the war is over, they're going to have a much bigger AQAP to bomb from here on out. That'll be a whole new war to oppose. but as you're describing, it's kind of running at idle right now. But now, real quick, before we end, tell me about the earthquake relief.
Well, yes. So, the U.S. has these really crippling economic sanctions on Syria that are specifically designed to prevent the country from rebuilding after war. That's the Caesar Act, it's called. And Blinken has said that it's U.S. policy to oppose the reconstruction of Syria. So you have this big earthquake hit, and 5,900 people at least were killed in northwest Syria, both in al-Qaeda-controlled territory and government-controlled territory. When I say al-Qaeda, I mean HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And so a lot of dead people. The U.S. sanctions were impeding aid as detailed by the Arab Red Crescent, and UN experts as well put out a lot of statements on this, calling for the sanctions to be lifted. The U.S. issued a 180-day exemption for the sanctions, which applies to transactions related to earthquake relief. So again, the UN experts on this are saying it's good, but it's not enough. They say fully lift the sanctions. And what you tweeted about was Assad. So the Syrian president, there's been a lot more engagement with him just in recent years, as it's clear he's not going anywhere. And the U.S. opposes, countries normalizing with him or upgrading relations. Since the earthquake, the U.S. has been saying they oppose, Egypt's foreign minister just went there, and the State Department, Ned Price, said, we oppose countries upgrading their ties with Assad, even if, it's part of helping them recover from this earthquake. They're like, they can do it without, this engagement. And then the House the other day just voted, overwhelmingly, I believe the vote was 414-2 to keep sanctions on Syria after this earthquake. So it's a really cruel policy. And that's part of the reason why I focus on it, because I think it shows how bad, these sanctions are. So again, there's been that exemption, but still not good enough. And even when the sanctions go back in place, they're designed to prevent reconstruction from the war. They're going to prevent reconstruction from the earthquake.
Yeah. All right. I'm sorry we're all out of time, but that is Dave DeCamp. He's our news editor at Antiwar.com. And also check out his podcast, Antiwar News. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, y'all. And that's it for Antiwar Radio for today. I'm your host, Scott Horton, editorial director of Antiwar.com and editor of the new book, Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Find my full interview archive, more than 5,800 of them now, going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org. And follow me on Twitter, at Scott Horton Show. I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. See you next week.